Look, I'm just gonna put it right out there, if you ain't a fan of the Evil Dead movies, well, then there's something wrong with you. Sam Raimi's classic cult horror trilogy centers around a cabin in the woods, a square-jawed hero in the form of Ash Williams, and a book called the Necronomicon, used mostly to summon the Deadites, demons with a real fondness for swallowing souls, and also announcing the fact,
I'll swallow your soul!
Come get some.
the first film, released way back in 1981, was a fairly standard horror flick about a bunch of people in a cabin getting possessed and then violently killed one by one. But it was the second film where the series really started to get a bit more momentum, and I think most people would probably agree that this is the best film in the original trilogy. As something of a pseudo-sequel, it essentially remade the first movie, adding in a much more surreal element, slapstick comedy, and also expanding the lore, along with creating some of the most iconic film lines of all time.
Groovy.
I mean, there's lines in this film along with the sequel Army of Darkness that are not only iconic as far as movies go, but also iconic in the land of video games.
Good. Bad. I'm the guy with the gun.
I mean, go play Duke Nukem 3D or Blood and you'll hear Ash's dialogue repeated verbatim.
Hail to the king, baby.
Hail to the king, baby.
Yo, she-bitch. Let's go.
Hey, she-bitch, let's go.
Plus, it also helped to establish the popularity of the double-barreled shotgun, or the Boomstick,
This is my Boomstick!
as a badass weapon that gets it done, which I think also kind of helped to popularize it in first-person shooters. Not to mention the chainsaw. And that scene of Ash attaching this thing to his right hand is arguably one of the most badass scenes in any movie ever made. Now, I know there's a TV series based off the franchise and about a bazillion comic books and spin-offs and everything else they've made, but to me, it's the original trilogy that really matters.
You got that?
And although it ain't the most popular series of all time, it was enough to spurn out a few video games based off it. The main ones I want to take a look at being Hail to the King on the PlayStation 1, and then Fistful of Boomstick and Regeneration on the Xbox. Also, seeing as there's going to be a new Evil Dead game coming out in a couple of months, I thought it'd be kind of fun to go back and take a look at these just to get a bit of perspective. Although these three games have different takes on the premise, there is one thing that does link them all together, and that's that they've all got pretty average, if not low aggregate review scores. Now, I know that review scores don't really mean all that much, I mean, unless you're a PS5 or an Xbox fanboy, in which case the difference between a game getting 89 or 91 on Metacritic can be potentially world-ending. But it's always kind of interesting to me to check out these older, more weakly reviewed games just to see what it was that made them so poorly received at the time. So, who wants some? Who's next, huh? How about it?
Well, if that's how you want it, come get some.
Now, before I get too far into things, I do want to mention too that this video is sponsored by SteelSeries. These guys make really good keyboards, gaming mice, gaming pads, and headsets. Right now I'm using the Apex 7 keyboard, I've got the Rival 5 mouse, not to mention their huge-ass LED prism cloth. And I'm pretty stoked to be able to offer a discount on all of these products, along with everything else in their catalogue. To get that discount's really easy, just use the promo code GMAN at checkout and you'll get 12% off your next order, which is, 12% more than you'd save otherwise. So head on over to steelseries.com to get started and yeah, enjoy the rest of the video. Now, the first game we're going to take a look at is Evil Dead Hail to the King, developed by Heavy Iron Studios for the Sega Dreamcast, Microsoft Windows, and the PlayStation 1, which is what I ended up playing and capturing the game on. This is the one that has the lowest review score out of all these main three, and after having played all of them, I do have to say that I think that score is pretty accurate. In fact, if I'm being honest, I almost kind of want to say that 5 points I think is too generous. The game starts off with Ash and fellow S-Mart employee and new girlfriend Jenny returning to that fateful cabin in the woods as a means of Ash getting some form of closure for all those traumatic events that he went through. But honestly, has there ever been any recorded instance of a fictional character in a horror game trying to get closure over past events that hasn't ended in disaster?
Mary, could you really be in this town?
Holy shit!
Yeah, didn't think so. Anyway, it takes all of 5 seconds of them being there before Ash's possessed severed hand shows up again, plays that old recording reciting the Necronomicon, which brings the Deadites back into the world yet again. The evil shows up along with Bad Ash, kidnapping Jenny and taken off into the forest. Yeah, awesome.
Jenny.
Initially, your goal is to just find 5 scattered pages of the Necronomicon, and then give them to some kind of weirdo who's hiding out in the nearby church.
All 5 of them?
You've got a few key areas to explore here, all spread out around the cabin. There's a scout camp nearby, a hillbilly's house, Plus all these winding paths of the forest, which are just outright mazes, and that's for starters. Because after you've done all that, it goes all Army of Darkness, and Ash gets transported back in time to 9th century Arabia, even meeting the guy responsible for writing the Book of the Dead in the first place.
Okay, now let's get one thing straight, Spinach Chin. I still don't like this whole I wrote the Book of the Dead thing.
At first though, I gotta say, things start off pretty good.
Groovy.
A lot of the environments seem to be really faithful to the second movie, from the layout of the cabin, the work shed out the back, even through to the corpse of Linda being buried out the front yard. I mean, she even comes back to life to attack you at one point. Although Ash is a mess of blurry pixels and polygons, they sure nailed the look of his outfit, his hair, plus his trademark chainsaw arm. It's just kind of a shame that the CGI model in the cinematics looks absolutely nothing like Bruce Campbell. There's some real Resident Evil vibes early on here too, like running away from these floating skull things. It's kind of like the crows from the Spencer Mansion. Plus there's an underground cave complex ending in a boss fight similar to fighting the Black Tiger in Resident Evil. Only this time it's a possessed scout leader who needs to be killed by dropping rocks on his head. You've got inventory management, even having to shuffle items through a universally accessible chest, and crafting your own health and chainsaw fuel. Plus, I really like the aesthetic for all these pre-rendered backgrounds. Got the dimly lit forest with eerie fog, and the usage of camera techniques like Dutch tilts for some of the fixed perspective stuff gives the whole thing a pretty stylized look. Also, having Bruce Campbell doing all the voice work just makes it feel that much more authentic.
Thanks, but no thanks, Doughboy. My scouting days are over.
In fact, at any time with the press of a button, you can let him bust out one of his scathing one-liners.
Come get some.
Sadly though, it's not going to take too long to see that this thing is just a pretty big pile of shit, and that'll happen almost as soon as you encounter your first enemy. Because although Hail to the King looks and feels like a survival horror game with tank controls and limited resources, it really doesn't play like one, and that's mainly because of the style of the combat and the behaviour of all these enemies. The thing is, you're in combat almost constantly, especially early on, and on top of that, enemies do not seem to stop spawning in. Compared to other survival horror games where the enemies are often preset and just roam in a single area, the enemies in Hail to the King seem to mostly appear at random, and as soon as you kill one of them, another one just pops right up to take its place. Oh, and the worst thing is sometimes you'll leave an area, and a couple of them are just going to be waiting right on the other side, pretty much blocking you in, which, yeah, that's always fun. Trying to run away from these guys is kind of impossible because the majority of environments are more or less just narrow pathways which can barely fit Ash, let alone an enemy. And then killing them is also kind of pointless because they're just going to respawn a few seconds later anyway.
Surprise, motherfucker!
There's a section early on here which is a literal maze, and you're not only navigating it and having to keep your bearings, but also trying to find an important quest item, along with dealing with Mr. Bones and his fucking wild ride popping out of the dirt every 2 seconds. I mean, look, I admire the sight of a skeletal corpse popping out of the ground as much as the next man does, but at least give me some time to get my bearings in between making me beat on these guys' chests like it's a goddamn xylophone. The one consolation is that the game does often drop ammo and medkits whenever you kill enemies, so at least it's not entirely for nothing. And honestly, I wouldn't mind killing monsters playing as Ash Williams if only the combat weren't one of the worst things ever made. Obviously, Ash is a little bit impaired when it comes to working hands, and securely slotted onto his right arm is of course his trusty chainsaw. At any point you can swing this thing around for a basic melee attack, and if you turn it on, assuming you've got fuel, it does a bit more damage as well. Then on the other hand, literally, you can carry an axe, a pistol, a shotgun, and a rifle. The thing is though, is that none of these are really all that great. The pistol is pretty much useless. I mean, it does so little damage that it's about as effective as trying to kill someone with a bowl of mashed potatoes. Same thing with the shotgun. I mean, it just doesn't have that kind of impact that you'd really want it to. And that right there, my friends, is a criminal offense, especially for an Evil Dead game. I mean, compare that to the shotguns in the Resident Evil games.
Let's see that in an instant replay.
Now that's a boomstick.
You got that?
There's that rifle in the game too, but again, it's really underwhelming, and the crappy damage doesn't really justify how little ammo you're given for it. Once you get to the 9th century, you can upgrade these into better versions, like the pistol becomes a nail gun and the shotgun fires out rock salt, but they're still about as damaging as hitting someone in the face with a wet sock. So what it means is that the vast majority of combat, for me anyway, just came down to using the chainsaw and the axe. It just kind of seemed to be the most effective, especially considering that most enemies attack you at melee range anyway. Pistols, shotguns and rifles need ammo and to be constantly reloaded. On the other hand though, there's no limit to the amount of times you can hit someone in the face with an axe or a chainsaw.
Swallow this.
And this is really just about mashing those attack buttons for both of these weapons over and over on the enemies until they finally go down. And it probably wouldn't be an issue if you could just run right past these enemies, but like I said, that's a luxury the game just doesn't offer us.
Say hi to Disco for me.
Later on near the end of the game, the chainsaw gets upgraded to a circular saw, which honestly might be one of the most badass things of all time. And if I wasn't so pissed off with how crappy every other aspect of this game is, that might have actually pepped up my spirits. It's just not a very good combat system, let me just put it that way. And that ain't even bringing up all of the weird issues with delayed or ignored control inputs, which means you'll often take damage far more than you mean to, and that's even more annoying. All I'll say is just get used to hearing that short audio clip of Ash grunting in pain, because it's going to be burned into your brain by the end of this thing. You know, assuming you're patient enough to get that far. Now, for almost that entire first area in the forest surrounding the cabin, you're fighting these ghost-looking things. The manual says that they're deadites, only I don't remember any of the deadites from the movies looking like this and materializing out of the ground to spit acid at you. And I don't care if they've been portrayed that way in some stupid spin-off comic where Ash teamed up with the Ghostbusters or the Ninja Turtles or some stupid shit like that. I don't care about that stuff. My point is that they're not very fun to fight, and it doesn't get any better when you travel back in time either, because you're still fighting the same looking deadites and spooky skeletons, only this time the skeletons happen to be wearing armor. Then there's these things, which are like demonic headless chickens, I guess? I don't know, man. The worst it gets is inside a temple against these cultist looking dudes, who have this really powerful AoE attack and they soak up like a bazillion hits before dying. Thankfully you only have to fight them a handful of times, which is good because they kinda suck. There's like this unique combat mechanic where if you hit a stunned enemy with your revved up chainsaw, Ash is gonna impale them, and then using your primary weapon, he'll execute them and spout off one of his famous one-liners.
Munch on this.
But half the time this doesn't even work, and it only seems to occur with specific enemy types to begin with. Plus, I have no idea what the purpose of it is to begin with. I mean, I think it increases the likelihood of enemies dropping more health or ammo, but to be honest, I really can't tell. I will say one thing though, which is that the game's RNG system for dropping items always seemed to drop stuff just when I needed it the most. Whenever I was running out of healing items or ammo, it seemed that enemies would always drop the one item I needed just when it was starting to become a concern. It's not the biggest praise, you know, but considering we're drowning in an Atlantic Ocean-sized swimming pool of bad design choices, I've got to give commendations whenever possible.
Who's laughing now, huh?
But you know what I think hurts the most about this is that you can genuinely see the potential that this thing could have had. And there is a real sense of love for the franchise buried under all of this muck. The concept of going back to when the Book of the Dead was written and witnessing the corruption it's had and how it's affected people across centuries is actually pretty interesting. There's a really funny sequence where the game wants you to complete this needlessly complex puzzle to get through a locked door or something, but then Ash just more or less breaks the fourth wall and shoots it open with his shotgun. It really feels like they understand how Ash works as a character, and they put him into these various situations and have him act accordingly.
Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants.
I might have already said this before, but I really like some of the visuals in those starting environments. At one point, it's almost got like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre feel to it, where you're inside this weird house full of furniture that looks like it's made out of body parts or something. There's a kitchen full of chopped up carcasses and a room with ankle-high pools of blood where these horrific bloated pig monsters come out to attack you. Then upstairs in the attic, locked away, there's a creepy old lady who looks like a dried up prune, encased in a magical force field who ends up turning into a giant spindly spider when you release her.
Whoa.
But then you have to fight her and you're reminded just how bad things truly are. At times, the whole thing almost kind of feels like a bit of a boss rush, and it seems like every few minutes you're taking on some kind of tough new enemy. Save for a few of them though, you can kill them pretty easily by just spamming your chainsaw or your axe on them over and over.
Suck on this.
The boss that you fight right after the spider lady is like a giant mutated tree or something. Yeah, sounds familiar. And if there's a better strategy to killing this thing than just standing in one place and hitting it with your chainsaw, well, then I'd love to hear it. In fact, really, I mean, standing still and hitting a tree with a chainsaw actually has a long history of being an effective way to kill trees. Most of the tactics for beating the other bosses is really just to hit them as quickly as possible, trying to avoid getting hit back too much in return. Or just run to one side of a room, shoot it a bunch of times, then run to the other side of the room and repeat. Or if you've got enough healing items, just trading blows and healing when necessary. Half the time I completely missed the boss's health bar appearing at the top right of the screen, and I just kind of assumed it was a basic enemy. About the most creative it gets is a fight against a dude in heavy armor, where you've got to first cover him in molten steel, then drop a vat of water on him right after, which shatters the armor, ultimately killing him. And I gotta admit, that's pretty cool. It's kind of like the ending to Alien 3. The final showdown against Evil Ash just comes down to slowly backing away from him while shooting at him over and over. Or if you're lucky, getting him stuck on a piece of the scenery like a complete idiot. Yeah, nice one, dumbass. For his second form, he turns into what looks like a giant rooster if it ever got infected by John Carpenter's The Thing virus. And then for some reason to beat this thing, you have to whack these 4 pillars, which somehow makes it vulnerable. Yeah, okay. But you know what? In retrospect, I think a lot of the bosses from those old Resident Evil games are also pretty crappy, so maybe I shouldn't be too harsh on this thing. Hail to the King is played across 2 discs. Got the first one for the starting areas in the present day, and then the second one for when Ash is transported back in time. But despite that, it's actually a pretty short game, and I managed to beat it in around 3 or so hours, which is more of a mercy than anything else. I also probably spent a good solid chunk of that time just mashing the interact button on something that I knew I had to interact with, but for some reason that sweet spot for activating it was just really hard to find. Like this bit in the cave after the fight with the Scoutmaster, right? You have to push these rocks out of the way to get out of the cave, but you have to be standing in this exact specific spot or it just doesn't register. You know what's most shocking about all of this too is that this thing came out in the year 2000. Looking at it from a distance, you'd think it was what, like a mid-90s game, considering it looks a lot like that first Resident Evil game which came out like 4 years prior. Now also consider that Resident Evil Nemesis had come out on the PlayStation barely a year before, which in my opinion just shits all over this. In terms of the controls, the combat, the puzzles, the visuals, you know, pretty much everything. Even Silent Hill came out a year earlier and it runs rings around this thing too. Hail to the King also got released on the Sega Dreamcast, and if you look at the timeline of games released for that thing, it's also around the same time when Resident Evil Code Veronica was released. Arguably one of the best games in that entire franchise, and again just showing that disparaging difference in quality between both titles. I guess my point is that if you're trying to make some kind of excuse for Hail to the King's shortcomings because it's, you know, a product of its time, well then guess what? That's not really true. Because the other products of the time still stand up a hell of a lot better than this does. Overall, it's like an interesting examination into how poorly a Resident Evil clone can be, and it's not really worth your time, so you're kind of lucky that I played this thing so you won't have to.
No! No!
No! As the first game we're going to talk about in this video, I admit we're not really off to a great start, but don't worry because from here on, it's only downhill. The second game is Evil Dead Fistful of Boomstick, which was developed by Viz Entertainment in 2003 for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox exclusively, and in my opinion, I think this is the best game out of all these 3.
We're gonna have to take a rain check on the Lovin', baby. Looks like my work here is just getting started.
You're not going in there! Are you crazy?
Crazy is as crazy does, baby. Now give me some sugar.
Now look, I might be a little bit biased here because, fun fact, while I was playing through this for the video, my partner went into labor with my son, so now every time I think of this game, I'm gonna think of my son being born.
Hell, that don't surprise me.
But even if we go back to those meaningless aggregate review scores, Fistful of Boomstick has scored a grand total of 58 on the Xbox. Yeah, a whole 7 points higher than Hail to the King. Funnily enough, this is actually a sequel to Hail to the King, taking place after the events in the first game, though this is really the only thing these 2 games share in common, thank God. It all begins with Ash recounting the story to what appears to be a man of Asian descent, at least he has all the physical attributes one normally associates to that racial background. The story then flashes back further to Ash drunk and in a shit mood in a dive bar in the town of Dearborn as he watches a television show where a journalist named Trisha is interviewing a professor named Eldridge about the Necronomicon. And if you ever want to see a better example of this thing coming out in the early 2000s, well then take one look at Trisha's design. She eventually kind of becomes the love interest. At one point Ash even asks her if she's wearing any panties. Romantic.
Don't get your panties in a twist, I'll get you out. You are wearing panties, aren't you?
Anyway, Trish and Eldridge play that old recording of the Necronomicon being recited on air, and because they're doing it from a TV station, it sends that signal far and wide, causing it to reach out across the entire town. So, Ash does what needs to be done. He heads out into the streets of Dearborn to stop the Deadites, again. In similar fashion to Hail to the King, about a third or so into the game, Ash again travels through time. Back to Dearborn during the colonial era, as it turns out old mate Professor Eldridge has been corrupted by the book's power and wants to use it for his own evil gains.
You know something, Eldridge? Your mouth is like my ass. Nothing good ever comes out of it.
Spare me your feeble insults and get to work.
Bruce Campbell returns to voice Ash, and again, I think the guy just deserves mad props for doing so. Really means a lot when an actor recognises and appreciates the fandom and the character he's created. Do you know what I mean? In stark contrast to someone like Harrison Ford, who wouldn't set foot inside a room full of Star Wars nerds if they had a gun to his head. Do you know what though? In Harrison's defense, I probably wouldn't do that either. I mean, Star Wars nerds are the fucking worst.
Spare me your feeble insults and get to work.
It's such a simple thing, but it just adds so much to the overall experience, and hearing Bruce's voice during the cinematics and during gameplay just adds a pretty big bonus to what's otherwise some pretty basic run-of-the-mill gameplay. A lot of the banter from Ash is pretty funny too.
One look at you and I know why some animals eat their young.
Wait a minute, ain't that a Rodney Dangerfield joke?
Boy, I'll tell you, now I know why tigers eat their young.
Right off the bat too, you'll notice the controls are way better than Hail to the King. This time it controls like a standard third-person shooter, which is really what that first game should have fucking been in the first place. And although it is hack and slash by genre, it's actually really more than that, with the puzzles and objectives being pretty complex. The initial goal is just to get into that nearby TV station, but that quickly opens up into so much more. First off, you gotta find some weapons to defend yourself with, which happen to be both the trademark chainsaw and the boomstick.
Ooh, I like this.
These starting areas are actually pretty fun too. They throw just the right amount of enemies at you so you can get accustomed to the way the combat works. Plus I love the way that Ash casually shoots over his shoulder at enemies behind him without even looking. I mean, where have I seen that before? The shotgun this time actually has some weight to it, and later on when you get those different shell types like the explosive shells, it can even be used for some basic crowd control with these weaker enemies. This is a 12 gauge double barreled Remington, S-Smart's top of the line. You can find this thing in the sporting goods department. Retails for about $109.95. It's got a walnut stock, cobalt blue steel and a hair trigger. That's right, shop smart, shop S-Smart. There's a really cool look to the stores and the buildings in these city streets, capturing that cozy aesthetic from that 6th generation of consoles. And about the only thing that kinda stuck out to me here was Ash's really weird facial expression and appearance. I mean, he kinda looks like a zombie. Plus, I thought this area really could have used a map because these city streets are just confusing as piss, especially considering how much stuff you need to find. Because, like I said before, apart from trying to get into that TV station, you're also going to need to find a police badge to get through some kind of blockade. I mean, why the cops are doing that in the middle of some kind of apocalyptic event, though, is anyone's guess.
No badge, no go. Clear?
You'll also need to find a key to get into the nearby mills so you can find Ash's trademark chainsaw. Then after that, you've got to clear out a nearby strip club parking lot from Deadites. For this though, the game doesn't even really tell you how you're supposed to do that. Soon enough, I figured out you're supposed to throw a stick of dynamite into the parking lot from the nearby street, but where do you get the dynamite from? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Dynamite can be found inside the nearby park, only the park is locked, so you're gonna first need to find the key. Once inside the strip club, you'll find a spell book, then backtracking to an earlier area, you're gonna find a strength spell, which lets you kick down the lock gate leading into the TV studio, assuming you found the key in the first place. Starting to see the point I'm trying to make here, how the game's really more than just running around and shooting or chopping up the same brain-dead enemies over and over. And hold on to that thought for when we start talking about Evil Dead Regeneration. Plus also keep in mind that this is all just for the first area in the game. I mean, it's not exactly Hex and 2 levels of intricacy when it comes to these puzzles, but still a fair amount of stuff to contend with. The next area is even more complex, requiring you to somehow get into the nearby museum. You gotta find evidence near a police station, along with shutting down a bunch of vortexes throughout the city, which are teleporting in Deadites and can only be closed using items made of silver. Yeah. Shit. It almost has a bit of a survival horror feel to it, with this inventory screen where you've got to hold on to all of these items and carry them throughout the levels to find where they need to be put to use. You can even hold on to medkits for when they're needed the most and have limited manual saves, which is all sounding very familiar. I actually have to kind of commend the devs for the way you use some of these items too. Like, throughout the entire game, you've got Ash's S-Mart employee badge in your inventory. And I was constantly wondering why the hell I had this thing, because even after a few hours, there still hadn't been a single time that I had to use it. But then, right up near the end of the game, you actually end up having to use it as a fake military ID to get into the makeshift camp of a bunch of Confederate soldiers. Because yeah, that's the thing that happens.
Will this do you?
Yeah, smart. You want a Colonel Smart's meal?
Yes I am.
I like the fact too that you get that key to the church in the modern times, and then that key works in every single time period as well. I don't know, I guess they never changed the locks. I think the biggest annoyance in this game though, which starts to rear its ugly head pretty quickly on and then stays around like a fart in a phone booth, is the fact that, again, like Hail to the King, enemies just do not stop spawning in to attack you. To the point that you can't even really stop to explore these areas all that thoroughly because you're going to be constantly attacked by something. Combat early on here is just really like the weakest aspect because you're just so limited in what you can do, and it's almost kind of unavoidable because if you try to run from everything, eventually you'll amass an entire legion of deadites chasing after you who are going to have to be dealt with at some point. Early on you've only got the revolver, Ash's shotgun, dynamite, which I've never used, and the chainsaw. And it's a bit of a repetitive cycle of just either shooting something with the shotgun when ammo allows it, or mashing that chainsaw button over and over until everything's dead. The spellbook offers up a few offensive options, but the only decent one is the strength spell, where Ash suddenly gains 50 pounds of muscle and about a foot in height, and then can kill enemies much more easily with the chainsaw. There's a lightning spell, which seems to be about as effective as pissing in someone's face, and a stun spell, which is kinda decent, but just doesn't have a big enough radius to really control a whole group of bad guys at once. Plus I feel that like these spells just use up far too much mana, and although you can get mana upgrades to extend the maximum, it's still never more than enough to just let you cast more than a couple of spells at a time. Most of the spells though are just used for puzzles, like later in the game you need to possess the tougher deadites to get into locked doors. And some of the others I didn't even bother to use, like summoning in a dog to help you for instance is just pathetic. This poor mutt gets his furry ass handed to him pretty much instantly. All those best defensive spells knock out your entire mana bar in a single usage, like this one here where you can rain down a storm of fireballs on nearby enemies, so as a result I just never really used them. Though I do like that gag about Ash miscasting them if you press the wrong button input. Fistful of Boomstick definitely reaches its lowest point about a third or so into the game. After exploring the city museum and finding your way underneath the building to a secret temple, you've then got the first boss fight in the game.
Hey, if this is a bad time, I can come back.
It's this weird top-heavy demon that throws rocks around, and the only way to damage him is by hitting the rocks back into his stupid face. The timing for that isn't too hard, but it kind of seems unless you're facing perfectly straight forward, Ash is going to knock the projectiles way off to the side instead. After that, the game teleports you back into the past to play the shitty games that suck ass, as Ash is sent back to the year 1695, which is cool, but at this point the game doesn't refill your ammo, your health, or your mana, and you're just thrown immediately into this gangbang against a dozen or so deadites. It's also got that stupid early 2000s video game bullshit where it often doesn't let you skip cinematics, so if you die at this point, and let's be real, you're probably gonna die. Each time you load back in, you're gonna need to watch that same 30-second or so long cinematic before it finally gives you back control. Moments like this is why I can see how this game might have gotten such average review scores. I mean, I can really see someone playing up until this point and then just kind of getting pissed off with all this stuff. It actually took a fair bit of willpower for me to not give up as well.
Hell, that don't surprise me.
But then it kind of reminded me of this really dogshit take I saw on Twitter recently, where some mouth-breathing journalist said that he rarely bothered to finish the games he played, and just assumed that he had the gist after a few hours, and then compiled his final thoughts into the literary diarrhea he called his reviews. And this right here is a perfect example of why that mentality is bad. Because if you stop playing at this point, well, you'd really be missing out. Because although it is at its weakest right now, it's from this point on that it actually starts to get really fun. Story-wise, the game introduces this running gag of Ash running into his ancestors, one of whom happens to be a blacksmith.
Guess a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. thought of making that the family motto.
And gameplay-wise, this translates into him making some new weapons.
Thanks, Pops.
The first being a flamethrower, which replaces the chainsaw on his right arm, and this thing is incredibly effective at dealing with the legions of deadites that are going to be on your ass the entire time you're in Colonial Dearborn. The second being an upgraded shotgun, which doesn't need to be reloaded, and I don't even think I need to mention why that's awesome. But the third, most importantly, being a goddamn Gatling gun. In the annals of best video game weapons of all time, if the shotgun and the rocket launcher are going to be fighting over first and second place, well then the chain gun, the minigun, Gatling gun, whatever, is always going to be fighting for third. And this thing is so much fun to use that it trumps almost every single other weapon at that point. I like how too, whenever you're using it, Ash basically becomes a gun turret, locking into place as he pans left and right, spraying out this barrage of bullets. That's also not my intent to undersell the other guns. You get a flintlock hand cannon too, which is just awesome, and a grenade launcher which also shoots out Molotov cocktails. I also really enjoyed the rest of the story from this point on too. You'll eventually time travel a little bit further into the future, around the time of the American Civil War, again running into one of Ash's ancestors, who's a member of the US Army, in a bit of a Mexican standoff with the nearby Confederates. All these guys are forced into working together to deal with a greater threat, putting aside their differences and helping Ash to carry out a siege on a nearby military fort that's been captured by the Deadites. And it's all kind of similar to Ash uniting Arthur and Henry in Army of Darkness. From this point on, you get flushed with ammo for pretty much all of your weapons, and the combat becomes really fun. The Gatling gun fires like a bazillion rounds a minute, and also has the benefit of not only knocking enemies on their ass, but staggering those bigger enemies so they can't even attack you. Yeah, where have I seen that before? Also carries you right up until the end of the game, which ends back in modern times in an alternate timeline where the Deadites have now taken over the world. Just think of that one scene from Back to the Future Part 2 where Biff is a rich, successful gambling tycoon, and you've got the right idea. The final boss is Trisha, who, spoiler warning, turns out to be the Deadite Queen, which again might be a bit of a throwback to Sheila in Army of Darkness.
You found me beautiful once.
Honey, you got real ugly.
It is a pretty dreadful boss fight, but I think it makes perfect sense as the final encounter, considering throughout the entire game she's always been suspiciously front and center for everything that's gone wrong here, and Ash has kind of treated her like a bit of a talking fleshlight up until that point.
Ash! This isn't the time for this.
Overall, for the 5 or 6 hours it took me, I think Fistful of Boomstick was an enjoyable, challenging romp across multiple time periods. And while it definitely has a bit of a lull in some key areas, I think most importantly, it's just fun to play. Plus, this might have the best ending out of all these 3 games. Again, in Army of Darkness fashion, Ash has somehow buggered up that time travel spell and ended up in the wrong time period. Classic. This time somehow finding himself in feudal Japan, where he's at the mercy of the Emperor, who, like all power-hungry idiots, wants to use the book for his own personal gain. Only before he can do so, he's killed by possessed samurai Deadites, who then turn their attention to Ash, who, now brandishing a fucking katana, utters one of his most immortal lines in perfect Japanese. I mean, damn dog, I'd play the hell out of an Evil Dead game set in Japan. And I think a katana attached to his arm in lieu of a chainsaw would just be awesome. Sadly though, that wasn't to be, and instead what we got was something else entirely. And that brings us on to the final game, Evil Dead Regeneration. Released for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and actually Microsoft Windows as well. Now, I really wanted to play through this on my Xbox, but for some reason the game just kept freezing all the time. It did also work on the Xbox 360 with that limited backwards compatibility, but it kind of looks like a turd in a snow globe. So I instead decided to play it on the PC, which also came with its own set of problems. Mostly just control issues, like the mouse being super wonky and the frame rate being capped at 30. I'd say it's a game that deserves a remaster to fix all this stuff, but then I don't think that would be me being entirely honest, because although I think Regeneration ain't that bad, it's really not that good either. Wow! It does start off properly though, with the main menu showing the iconic cabin, along with the eerie sight of Linda's reanimated corpse dancing around it. And then I got sucked in further during the opening tutorial level, where it does a pretty bang up job of recreating some of those memorable scenes from the second film. The only thing is that this whole story takes place in a world where Army of Darkness never existed. It goes off the notion that at the end of Evil Dead 2, instead of going back in time, Ash was instead committed and has since spent the entire time confined in a padded cell. Now look, I don't know what a world without Army of Darkness looks like, and to be honest, I don't want to know.
Oh, you miserable bags of bones!
But I'm having a hard time getting past the fact that right out of the gate, this game just shits all over my favourite film in the trilogy. Anyway, the story begins with Ash in the asylum where his lawyer, who has a questionable amount of cleavage, shows up and says she believes him, saying she's found the cabin, and then she offers to help him clear his name.
I have to get to the authorities before Reinhardt realizes this book is missing.
Meanwhile, the dude running the asylum, the evil Professor Reinhardt, who kinda looks like Betruger from Doom 3, has gotten his latex-gloved hands on the Necronomicon and uses it to summon the Deadites.
So diabolically beautiful!
Causing all the patients to get possessed or killed and sending the place into absolute havoc, but also luckily freeing Ash in the process. And I mean, look, if you're gonna have a horror game set anywhere, well, it's gotta be an asylum, so they do get points for doing that part right. It almost kind of reminded me a bit of The Suffering with the whole prison/asylum backdrop. Not to mention the first boss is a dude with an electroshock band around his head that shoots out electricity, which I think just would have really fit right into The Suffering's wheelhouse.
What was that? You can't believe you just got your ass kicked by a one-handed nut job?
Then after that, you're in a graveyard fighting skeletons like it's Golden Axe or something.
Here's the weight off your shoulders!
So you've got a creepy asylum and a spooky graveyard. Yeah, not the worst way to start things off. This whole prologue, though, is really just a means of getting you used to how the combat works. Then after a few minutes of uppercutting Deadites with Ash's arms stump and shooting them with a handgun, you'll eventually get his chainsaw and trademark Boomstick, which you're going to use for the remainder of the game. More importantly though, this first level introduces Sam, the half Deadite, half human sidekick.
Okay, bad first impression.
Aptly named Sam in a bit of a nod to Sam Raimi, and funnily enough too, he's also voiced by Sam's brother, Ted.
Thanks for the lift, jerk.
It's kind of like if Joe Pesci was an undead midget that got half his face ripped off by a belt sander.
Nice freaking pep talk.
Sam ends up playing a pretty big role from this point on too. I mean, he's around for not only every cinematic and plot twist, but also just for the gameplay in general. Ash is also visited by the spirit of Professor Nobi, you know, as in the idiot responsible for reading the book in the first place and starting this whole fucking mess. And in the game, like in Evil Dead 2, he's a floating disembodied head that kinda looks like Captain Howdy from The Exorcist. It's actually a pretty cool looking visual effect considering how old the engine is.
But be warned.
Anyway, Nobi mentions that Ash is gonna need Sam's help to find and close all these various Deadite portals. Portals which happen to be guarded by some powerful enemies that end up serving as the boss fights. So, like a pimple on an ass cheek, Sam is stuck with Ash, no matter where he goes, for better or for worse, in sickness or in death. And yeah, this little guy's gonna die a whole heap here throughout the game. It actually becomes a pretty key component to his character. I mean, one of the first things you do to him is kick him into a crematorium furnace. He also comes in pretty handy during some of the boss fights, able to be kicked onto these enemies to distract them for long enough so Ash can deal out some damage. The only thing I found a bit weird was that Ash just seems really rude and kinda mean to him early on, which didn't really fit with his character. I mean, it is kind of downplayed by the fact that no matter what happens to Sam, he always seems to come back to life, and he also does it without ever really making a fuss. But I don't know, man, Ash acting like a complete dick here just kinda stuck out to me.
Ash, isn't it great we're finally pals? I mean, we had a pretty rough start, but, you know. Yeah, I did.
Reality check, twerp. I'm not your pal.
Damn it!
The biggest thing that sticks out to me though, it ain't the way that Ash treats Sam, right? It's the combat, which comprises, you know, 80 to 90% or so of the game. And it's just so basic and repetitive. I think the main reason for that is that they've opted to give the player unlimited ammo for all of the weapons, which means you can get through most of the game just by mashing that shoot button over and over. You've got the pistol, the shotgun, and like a grenade launcher, and they all have infinite ammo. So you really can just mash that fire button until your finger goes numb. I do have a bit of a suspicion that they did originally plan to include a more traditional ammo system, because there's all these crates stacked around the levels with the word supplies on them, but I don't know, maybe at like some point they just gave up trying to balance this out and just added infinite ammo instead. Apart from just mindlessly shooting things with guns, you can also mindlessly attack things with the chainsaw. Well, I guess less mindlessly, because at least this time there's some basic combos. Now I say it's basic because it's really just going to be something like pressing the attack button 3 times in a row, or pressing it twice in a row and then pressing the shoot button. I mean, yeah, that's a tough one to remember, isn't it? Once an enemy's weakened, there's an icon above their head, which means they're then ready for a finishing move, which is kind of like an execution where Ash is going to kill them in a pretty stylish way.
Hurry up! Before this mook stomps my face!
Nice job, Stubby.
But there doesn't seem to be really any kind of benefit for doing this over just killing them in the traditional way, outside of it just saving you a couple of seconds.
Oh, I'm good.
During that opening level in the asylum, I noticed you could pretty much air juggle enemies by uppercutting them and then keeping them up there with the pistol. And then later on when you get the harpoon gun, you can do the same thing again with the shotgun. But again, like, there doesn't seem to be any point to doing this as far as I can tell, outside of it just looking kinda cool. It almost kind of makes me wonder if they set out to make some kind of Devil May Cry knockoff or something. That would have been awesome, by the way. You know, being able to launch enemies up into the air, follow up with combos and juggle them around. It's even got that thing where you're locked into an area and have to fight the Deadites, and the doorways are blocked by these walls covered in spirit faces. I mean, much like the same thing that had happened in Devil May Cry. Early on in the game, you unlock Evil Ash mode, you've got Bad Ash, and then Goody Little Two Shoes.
You're goody little two shoes.
Now, I know this is a bit of a reference to Evil Dead 2, but I kind of think it looks more like Dorian from The Mask in this form as opposed to, you know, Bruce Campbell.
I'm just the next employee who's come for his back pay, or should I say payback?
Either way though, in this form he does a bunch of extra damage, and he also knocks everything back with a powerful shockwave when activated. You can even use this mode against the bosses, which just makes some of them a complete pushover. But it doesn't really change the fundamentals of the combat. It just means that now instead of something dying in 5 hits from the chainsaw, it's now going to die in 1 or 2. And again, I can't help but see similarities here between this and Dante's Devil Trigger. Later on, you can swap out the chainsaw for the harpoon gun, which lets you reel in enemies for an easy kill.
Could come in handy. That is, if it works.
But again, it just kind of becomes that familiar repetition of reeling something in, shooting it, and then just finishing it off. There's a flamethrower too, which is more or less only in the game to be used for some of the puzzles, if you can call them that. Mostly igniting Sam and then kicking him into something, or in the final level, lighting up about a dozen braziers because someone thought that that counted as meaningful gameplay. It doesn't, by the way. And then finally, in like the second or so last level, you get an upgraded chainsaw, and this thing can chop right through the Deadites who've been able to block your attacks throughout the game up until that point. But this thing becomes redundant shortly after you get it, because for some reason, the game then stops including those enemies that could block your attacks anyway. And what it all kind of means is that you just never really feel like you're progressing or getting any stronger when it comes to killing the enemies. The combos you use at the beginning of the game are the same ones you're going to be using right up until the end. I mean, compare that to Fistful or Boomstick, right? Where you start off with the shotgun, then you get the flamethrower, more powerful ammo types, before finally getting your hands on the Gatling gun. If I could make another comparison, it'd be like, imagine playing Doom, right? And then after you get the shotgun, it becomes like the only gun you get to use for the remainder of the game. That'd get boring, wouldn't it? Now, on the other hand, you've got your pint-sized sidekick Sam, who can be used during combat, but isn't really ever that essential. He's handy for kicking onto the enemy's heads, where he's going to pull that thing off like it's a goddamn champagne cork.
You won't be needing this anymore!
But the main way this little guy's been integrated into the game is also one of its worst mechanics. And that's these sequences where you need to utilize him to get through these blocked passageways. You see, key points in the game, you're going to come across these doors blocked by this huge demonic head. And the only way to get past these things is to track these tentacles back and find a spirit encased in some kind of demonic testicle. I mean, look at that thing and tell me that's not someone's nutsack. I dare you.
Feel that. Tell me that doesn't feel like a cock.
Then you need to puncture this thing with your chainsaw and escort Sam back to the demon head, preventing his fragile little body from being violated by the abundance of enemies that are going to start spawning in. And you have to do this 3 times for every single head. And you'll need to do this not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times throughout the entire game. Yeah, 4 times. I mean, like, is this the only thing they could come up with?
What about being on the same side don't you get?
Doesn't help that Sam's about as fragile as a water balloon, and if he takes so much as a couple of hits, well, he's killed, and you have to repeat the process all over again. Yeah, by the way, enemies respawn every single time, so have fun with that. Now, I do really like the visual of this demon head thing, the way its eyes track your movement, and the funky looking tendrils that come out of it. But I mean, honestly, did we really need to do the same thing here 4 fucking times? I mean, that's just a serious lack of creativity.
That had to hurt.
The whole gameplay loop in Regeneration can really be summed up in these 3 main loops, which it just repeats ad nauseum. First off, you're just controlling Ash and killing deadites or other enemies. This often happens in a locked off arena, which is just an open area without any real kind of layout. Then once all the enemies are dead, you can move onward.
And stay dead.
The second is that you're controlling Sam. You'll crawl through small holes, you'll hang onto large pipes, and avoid getting squished by monsters. You know, kind of like an evening spent with your mum. This will also often end with Sam jumping on the back of one of the bigger deadites, which he then has to piggyback to smash through some kind of barricade. What's even worse is when you have to fight these guys afterwards as Ash. It's this mundane loop of kicking Sam onto the deadite to distract it, then running up and whacking it in the nuts for a bit with the chainsaw. It'll then kill Sam, so you wait for him to respawn before repeating the process another couple of times until this big, fat, stupid asshole goes down for good.
Hey, Shiro!
And stay dead.
Yeah, and I hope you like doing that the dozen or so times you have to do it throughout the game too. And then thirdly, you've got all those times you've got to escort Sam past all the demon head things, right? Which is really just a combination of all those other gameplay loops anyway. It really just kind of feels like they came up with 3 mechanics and then didn't know how to progress from that any further, so they just kept using them over and over. All in a game where you never run out of ammo, are rarely in danger of dying, and have instant access to a rage mode where the combat becomes even more trivial. There's a few times you have to do some basic platforming, but these are pretty much unfailable, because every time you fall off the ledge, Ash just pulls himself back up again, none the worse for wear. And I never thought I'd say this, but it kinda makes me miss the puzzles from Hail to the King, or even some of the basic item hunting and exploration aspects of Fistful or Boomstick. I don't know, man, it just makes Regeneration look so basic in comparison. I will give the boss fights some credit though. Most of these are actually well designed and they all have various attack patterns you'll need to come to grips with. It's more than just finding out that one specific weakness and repeating that one move required to defeat it. It's still nothing all that memorable or any kind of pinnacle of boss design, but I think as far as all 3 of these games are concerned, this is probably the best that it's gotten.
Ah, shit. Not again.
A bit of a shame too, because again, the game actually looks really good, especially artistically. Sam's animations when he's running around or clinging onto poles is kinda wholesome, and hearing Ted Raimi and Bruce Campbell fling insults at each other is also a lot of fun.
You have a favorite kind of pie?
Look, I know you don't breathe, but try inhaling once in a while.
The environments have that whole cliche horror motif to them, being hospitals, mines, graveyards, and forests. Then the town you visit at the end of the game looks like something out of Silent Hill, complete with eerie fog and all these empty streets. Then the last level is set in this entirely different weird dimension, complete with otherworldly architectures and rivers of blood. So you definitely can't fault the artists who worked on this thing. There's actually a fair amount of effort put into these cutscenes too. There's some great cinematography in some of them as well, like during one of the opening cinematics, it kind of pans down through all these floors of the asylum, showing the multiple levels of this hellhole, ending in the bowels of the building where Reinhardt's performing this occult ritual, which is the thing that kicks everything off. Plus, I love those trademark shots of the evil moving around, like this one here when it's chasing Ash through the building, stopping to get inside an elevator, and then even getting a bit impatient at the lift for taking so long. I think it's stuff like this that makes the game ultimately playable and really retains your interest, because otherwise I really do think the gameplay is about as boring as it comes. And if it didn't have anything to do with Ash or the Evil Dead, I gotta be honest, I don't think I would have even kept playing it.
Let's see if these freaks are still allergic to lead.
This actually has the highest aggregate score out of all the 3 that I looked at during this video. Yeah, a whopping 66 on the Xbox and a 69, lol, on the PC. And if nothing else, it's definitely the most accessible. I think the main problem this game and a whole lot of other games from that time had was that it just had so much to compete with. I mean, if you look at what else came out in 2005, you had games like Time Splitters 3, Call of Duty 2, Devil May Cry 3, not to mention Resident Evil 4.
No thanks, bro.
So for an Evil Dead game to come along, which really was a bit of a niche franchise at the time, well, definitely wouldn't get the best reception when it's got to deal with those other heavy hitters. Either way, if nothing else, I hope I've helped shed some light on these older titles.
You are wearing panties, aren't you?
And remember that no matter how crappy or average this new game might turn out to be, well, there's always worse.